For over 48 years, Jason Morrison has been torturing anyone with functioning ear holes with his voice and opinions. He is now pleased to introduce you to Have You Read This? A podcast that makes you question why you ever loved reading in the first place. Anyway, see if you can stomach another episode.
So I didn't get this one published super early like I normally do. Things have been busy. And for those of you who are not here in the U.S., today is day after Election Day. And there's a lot of upset people everywhere on both sides. I'm not going to get into anything about my beliefs or anything. And if you're like, great, dude, I just tuned in for the freaking books. I don't need political crap. This is for my listener in Uruguay. Shout out Uruguay. You can just skip through the rest of this mess if you want. I promise it won't take long. But I think one of the things that bothers me most about this election or any elections is I've seen some people who will hop on social media and say things like, we should be supportive of one another. We're tired of the divisiveness. This is terrible. We should be united. We're all Americans. And then after the election, it's like, if you need a reason to delete me, here's who I supported. And then there's a group of people who celebrate as if their college team won a bowl game. They're the kind of people that use the phrases on Facebook like, we had to play the other team and the referees. And they use the term we a lot, as if they were actually on staff of the college football team when they probably only stepped foot on the campus maybe twice. But anyway, putting your hope and faith in one single individual may not be the best way to go. If you voted your conscience and your beliefs, that's all you can do. Whether your candidate is in the driver's seat or not, I hope whoever's in charge, whether I voted for him or not, does a great job, because I think it'll impact us all. For those that are willing to actually talk about things, I would encourage you to find people that maybe don't agree with you and talk to them about things, as long as they can talk about it. Had a guy I knew many, many years ago who claimed to be tolerant. He could talk about anything, and then you'd go out to eat with the guy, and he's the first one to start raising his voice and get upset when you disagree with him. A little bit of psycho, if you ask me. But I think it's important to talk to people that you disagree with and have intelligent conversations. Sit down and maybe learn something from somebody else. Anyway, back to the books. I saw a post recently of someone who shared what they just got done reading, what they're reading now, and what they're going to plan to read next. So after a political rant, seemed like a good way to kind of dig into this. I just finished Inferno, a memoir of motherhood and madness by Catherine Cho. Now, this wasn't a bad book, but the audio book version left a little bit to be desired. And I think that's why it didn't carry a heavy impact for me. It's a postpartum psychosis memoir, and just I guess it was just the reading of this thing felt like almost, and you know, I hate bashing stuff like this, but it kind of felt like AI was reading it. Like I saw a door, the door was open. I walked through the door. I don't know. I just like audio. Whoever's narrating a book can make it or break it. I tell you. So I kind of think that if that synopsis and that kind of story interests you, I would read it. Don't listen to it. I am almost done reading Good Looking Ugly by Rob Smith. Rob was kind enough to send this to me, and I read the synopsis of it, and I wonder if this would have been something that I would have picked up off the shelf or not. And there's part of me that wants to say that had I read the synopsis, I might not have gone and bought the book. That being said, I am enjoying it, and I think that's because it is different than what I might normally read. So this is a kind of a sign to anybody out there. Don't get stuck in the same genre. Go pick a book out that you might not normally go pick out and read it, because you're missing out if you're not doing that. And as for what's next, I got my hands on a first edition copy of Zombie by Joyce Carol Oates. And I don't know if having a first edition of that makes me cool or not, or if that's even worthwhile. I just think it's cool to have a first edition of things like that, and it makes me happy. So that's really all that matters. I saw another post, and I thought this was pretty good. Somebody asked a question. It was something along the lines of, are there any authors that you love so much that you don't need to know anything else other than just having their name on the book, and you would just read it? You would read it without knowing anything about the book. And I was contemplating that, and it really, really got me wondering about my list. And I think there was a few of them that come to mind. David Joy, Lucinda Berry, Adam Neville, Sean Cosby, Frederick Bachman, Blake Crouch, David Simon, Jon Krakauer, Cormac McCarthy comes to mind. However, it doesn't look like, unfortunately, we're going to get any new books from him. But those are just some of the names of a few authors that popped up. And I wouldn't even ask what the book was about if they wrote it. Just hand it to me. Instantly start reading it. Just put it in my hands. And I feel like it would be a 4 or 5 star read from any one of those authors. One of the authors on that list, Jon Krakauer, I credit with helping me kickstart my reading journey. Saying the word journey kind of sounds really fancy, by the way. Like I literally just picked up a book and started reading and didn't stop reading. Journey sounds like some kind of epic adventure, or that I planned a detailed military invasion or something. But you have to go all the way back to my second episode where I talk at length about how awesome Into Thin Air was, which was his account of the 1996 Everest disaster. Jon Krakauer was born in April 1954 and is not just an author, but a lot of people didn't know that he's an experienced mountaineer as well. In fact, Into Thin Air wasn't just a book he researched and wrote about. This was an event he experienced firsthand, given that he was a member of that 1996 expedition to Mount Everest. That one was said to have been one of the most deadliest disasters in Everest history. And if you look up Wikipedia, Krakauer's popularity is said to have come from his time working as a writer for Outside magazine. Gave that up and he pursued writing full time. And I, for one, am glad that he did, because I think the guy is a brilliant author. To date, I have read 5 of his books, and every single one of them was fantastic. I was about to say 4 or 5 star reads. I didn't even go back and look to see what I did in terms of ratings on these things. But since my memory's failing, let's just say that I would give any of his books 4.5 stars to 5, just about on everything. And so I've read Into the Wild, Under the Banner of Heaven, A Story of Violent Faith, Into Thin Air, Missoula, Rape and the Justice System in a College Town, and Where Men Win Glory, The Odyssey of Pat Tillman. Into the Wild, I believe, was the first Krakauer book that I read many, many, many years ago. This was published in 96, and I think it spent 2 years on the New York Times bestseller list. It's really a fascinating story. Into the Wild takes you through the story of Christopher McCandless, a guy who graduated from Emory University in Atlanta in 1990, and basically he got rid of everything he owned and began a journey to Alaska. McCandless's remains were found toward the end, I think, of 92 in an abandoned school bus on the Stampede Trail. I remember seeing Krakauer share something online where they actually somehow transported that bus somewhere, and I think it's actually part of a museum now. But this book covers his life, the life of Christopher McCandless, of course, his journey out west, the persona that he took on as Alexander Supertramp. And this story was actually adapted into a movie directed by Sean Penn, and I thought the movie was really good. I didn't go back and look. Sometimes I like doing this where if a nonfiction book is adapted into a movie, I love to see articles about what the author thought about it. Like, did the movie hold to all the facts that the author revealed while they were researching it? But if you follow Krakauer on social media, he'll periodically share information and updates about this book, or really any of the books that he's written. And there's always these little tidbits of facts that I just found extremely interesting, like postcards that were received from McCandless to a friend of his where he says, I now walk into the wild, which is where the name of the book comes from. To this day, this is still one of the most interesting books that I have read. Under the Banner of Heaven A Story of Violent Faith was released in 2003. Obviously, I'm not going to be taking these books in chronological order or really any order because that is not at all how I do things. Life is chaotic and unpredictable. This was Krakauer's third nonfiction bestseller. Was already a big time Krakauer fanboy at this point. And I think if I remember right, I'd read Into the Wild and Into Thin Air, and I thought, I'm just going to read everything this guy's written. Under the Banner of Heaven focuses on Mormonism, polygamy, the Latter-day Saints, and the Lafferty brothers, who were said to have murdered Erica and Brendy Lafferty in the name of their faith. This may not come as a shock to you, but the leaders in the Latter-day Saints church didn't care so much for this book. They didn't like it as much as I did, much a lot of other people did. They labeled it as basically garbage. I personally don't know of a reason why Krakauer would make up a book like this just because he wasn't a fan of the religion. It's not like somebody came to his door with a pamphlet and he's like, all right, I'm going to show y'all. I'm going to write a book that destroys your whole religion. He actually seems pretty balanced in his approach to all of the books that he's written. On the other hand, if I was a leader of the Latter-day Saints, I probably would not be rushing to send Krakauer a Christmas card each year either. If you want to go learn the wild history behind Mormonism, this book is great, and it's also eye-opening, a little bit of terrifying, a little bit of shocking, a little bit of everything. Into Thin Air covers the deadly 1996 Mount Everest expedition. I'm not going to go too far into details here because I already did an entire episode on this, but I like mentioning it because I credit this book as what truly turned me into a reader. It's a tragic story where several people died on the mountain, Krakauer being one of the climbers who made it to the summit and then returned safely. And like a lot of what Krakauer's written, this one was not without controversy. He initially wrote about his experience in Outside Magazine, but he wanted to add more details and clarify more of what happened, which turned into the novel that we have today. Some of those on that expedition questioned his writing, and I remember reading somewhere that this was the only book of his where he released a new edition with added information in the back of it, specifically to dispute some things that other people had written. This book was also turned into a movie, I think twice, actually. I think there was a made-to-TV version, and then there's the most popular version being the 2015 release. And I think, don't quote me on this. Actually, you know what? Quote me on this. I don't care if I'm wrong. Come at me. I think if you look this up, I think there's articles where Krakauer did not like some of the adaptation of this movie. Could be wrong. Probably wrong. Maybe I'm right. Nobody really knows at this point. Missoula. Rape in the Justice System in a College Town. This should be a pretty self-explanatory title. How is rape handled by colleges? What is the justice system like for victims? Krakauer researched cases linked, I think, primarily to the University of Montana. This book deals with sexual assault, fairness in prosecution, why victims do not want to report their rapes initially to police, and how often, and I should say how too often, those guilty of committing the crimes are given more benefit of the doubt than the victims. I don't know if this one gets as much attention as the other books, but I think it's still important to read. I don't know how much has changed in the realm of this. I would love to say that after this book and after a lot of exposure and awareness that cases like this are handled much better than the ones that are depicted in this book, but I'm not entirely sure on that. I think this is eye-opening. I think all of his books are eye-opening, but naturally this one dealing with sexual assault, I think it makes it a little tougher to read. But one of the brilliant things about this guy is that he can take a topic like this and write about it fairly. He's just so talented with the way he researches and handles things. I just love everything that he's written, and I'm glad that he took on a challenging subject like this. Finally, Where Men Win Glory, The Odyssey of Pat Tillman. This book was released in 2009, and just like everything else Krakauer has written, this book was filled with information that I had no clue about. Up until this point, I think really the only thing that I had ever known about Pat Tillman was that everybody called him an American hero. He was in the NFL, and he was said to have just given up all of that to go serve his country where he died. That was all I knew. And I would be willing to bet that that is all most people know about the guy. What I did not know was that the Army was said to have covered up his death because Tillman died by friendly fire in Afghanistan. And I'm not at all saying that because that happened that Pat Tillman was not a hero. Can't even imagine having a career in the NFL and deciding I would rather go be in Afghanistan. That just is kind of mind-blowing to me. This book covers not only his life and tragic death and the controversy around it, but there's also a general history of civil wars covered in Afghanistan, which makes this book a really, really good read as well. So, if you're still here, pretty obvious. Krakauer is just one of those authors I would read anything from, like anything at all, sight unseen. Just hand me a book. I followed the guy on just about every platform he is active on, and I've just been hoping and praying that one day he might drop a new book on us. I don't know if that'll happen or not. I don't know how active he is in researching books, if he's even wanting to write, if he's just, hey, I'm just retired. You know, it probably would have made a lot of sense if I would have looked something like that up and I could have talked about it here intelligently, but that's not how I do things. So to sum it up, Krakauer is a talented author and his books are amazing. And if you disagree with me, then you're wrong, because you know what? This is my podcast, and what I say goes. Until next time.